I saw this week Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is the fifth and final Indiana Jones movie. I'm sure Disney is going to make more and dig up that corpse, but I know this is the last one that Harrison Ford's gonna do, and we'll see how long they can respect him, hanging up the hat before they try and make a new one with Chris Pratt as a younger Indiana Jones. But at least this is the fifth and final one with Harrison Ford, unless they do an even worse thing and just do a CGI Harrison Ford for a sixth movie. Because boy, movies these days, reviving dead actors with CGI, it's not great. We'll be talking about that when we get to The Flash. But for now, let's talk about this one. So, one of my first things going into this movie, I wasn't sure how much they were going to address the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because dear God, that movie was awful. Everyone hated it. And in particular, I was like, well, that movie ended with Indy and Marion getting married, and he's got a son now. What's going to happen with them? And I know that Shia LaBeouf isn't in this movie, so I was like, okay, so how are they going to address it? And half of me was going to be they're going to pretend that movie didn't even happen. They're just not going to address any of it. But they did. It's still very much, they're obviously written out, but they did it in a way that actually kind of works for the story that they were going for. They actually have it that this isn't really, I guess it's a spoiler for a character nobody cares about, but it motivates Indiana Jones pretty much from the start, that his son actually enlisted in Vietnam and was killed over there. And that kind of ended up breaking apart his marriage to Marion. So neither of them are really in this movie, because, his son's dead and his wife's left. So he's kind of getting ready to retire as a professor, and he's just kind of living on his own. He's kind of at in a low place in his life. And I kind of feel because we don't even see Marion in the movie until the very end of the movie, and there are certain motivations involved in the plot that I think would have played out a lot better if we had seen him and Marion have a scene where they're signing the divorce papers or something like that. Something more to better establish that, I don't know. I feel that could have been handled better. The fact that they bring her in at the very end, it's okay, if you weren't going to have her at the beginning, just don't have her at the end. I get they want to have him, give him a happy ending where he reunites with Marion anyway, but it felt maybe when they filmed it, they weren't even sure if they were going to have her, and then they finally did, and they're okay, we've got her for the one scene. I don't know. I don't think it was well handled. I kind of feel the ending to this movie was not well handled at all. So let's talk about the title, the Dial of Destiny. This is, as far as I'm aware, this is a completely fictional artifact, but it's called Archimedes' Dial, and it was basically a mechanical device that Archimedes had built. When I saw the trailers, I thought it was going to be a time machine. It's actually not. What it does is it can measure fissures in time. So basically it can detect where and when a wormhole through time is going to open up so that people can go through it. And the main villain of the movie is, for the third time in an indie movie, it is the Nazis, which is a good choice. Nazis are the best villains for Indiana Jones movies. And the main Nazi is this guy, Mads Mikkelsen. Love this dude. Oh yeah, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, the Nazis are back. But actually, I really like this guy as a villain. They kind of have him set up as a Werner von Braun kind of a character, because he was a Nazi scientist. The movie's set in 1969. There's a parade for Neil Armstrong and Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin coming back home from the moon. And this guy, this Nazi scientist, he was one of the guys who helped build the rocket that got them there. So, very Werner von Braun. One thing that's confused me a little is that, he's actually, going under an assumed name when he was working with NASA to do all that. And, Operation Paperclip, we didn't really do that. Werner von Braun, it was known that he built rockets for the Nazis, right? But here he's his name's Voller, but when he's working for NASA, he's gone under an assumed name of Schmidt. And he and Indy had a run-in during the end of the war, tussling over half of the Archimedes' Dial. Indy runs into him again in 69 and is just oh, you still a Nazi? Admiral Paco says, historical side note, if my memory serves, I believe the Dial of Destiny is based on the actual artifact known as the Antikythera mechanism. Okay, so yeah, I wasn't sure about that. Antikythera, that they do bring up that. That's what they call it. I just wasn't sure if this specific one was like one that Archimedes had actually built, or had been like rumored to build, or if the Antikythera was just a kind of device that this was based on. And like I said, so the beginning of the movie is actually like probably a 20 to 30 minute sequence set in 1944 with a de-aged Indiana Jones fighting Nazis on a train trying to get the half of Archimedes' dial, because it's been split in two and nobody knows where the other half is. And the de-aging effect on him is pretty good. There is a thing where you can kind of tell like the edge of his face are in more of like a kind of a too perfect circular shadow. It makes me think of like sometimes when like Iron Man pops open his face mask so you can see him, but he's still got the mask around it, but you can tell that the mask is CG, and it's just like they do like that like fake shadow to blend in. It's a little bit noticeable, especially because of how many shots they have of him de-aged. But I thought I thought overall it looked really good. It was really convincing. Admiral Paga says, probably use the name Archimedes because he's known for his inventions and being good at math. Yes, well, I mean, like, this is Archimedes specifically built this device. So yeah, like Archimedes is he's kind of a central figure in this, you know, he built it. Toby Jones is in this movie, but he's really only in the flashbacks. I think he's dead by the present day, but he was like Indiana's associate, and he was the one who was really obsessed with the Dial of Destiny and had like studied it and researched it and stuff. But the real other main character that Indiana Jones teams up with is Helena Shaw, which is Toby Jones's character's daughter. And I don't really know what to make of her. She's kind of an obnoxious character. She's a very, like, dishonest and amoral and driven by greed kind of a character, but also she's Indiana's goddaughter, and she obviously has, like, genuine affection for him, but, like, not enough to you know, not, like, stab him in the back and like, steal from him and do all this stuff. And like, you would expect, like, if they had her set up like that at the beginning of the movie, that they would have had, like, a character arc where she kind of realizes more that she cares more about Indiana than she cares about money. But there's never really, like, a distinct moment where she has to make that choice. It's always, like, she's in a position where there's no conflict to have that choice made. Like, any kind of, oh, well, I could still, like, make money off of this. There's no moment where she has that choice and then decides instead to help Indiana, right? Like, I feel like a lot of the character arcs in this movie just really weren't there. I really like the actress. I think she's a very charming person. It's just, there's no real arc for her. And then going down here, I honestly don't remember this character's name. I don't know why they gave her a character poster. She's really a very minor character, but she's like a CIA agent who has been like working with Voller. Basically, she's like placating him for the US government because he's been building them rockets to go to the moon. And she's also helping him get the Dial of Destiny because it's like, well, he wants the Dial of Destiny in exchange for helping them build the rocket and all that. And then Antonio Banderas is in this, and he just plays like an old friend of Indiana's who's like a sea diver, but he's a very minor role. It's Antonio Banderas, so he's a big name, but he really was just brought in for a cameo. There's really nothing to him. But then this guy, Teddy is the kid sidekick in the movie, and like, I think they did him really well. He's from Tangier. He's like, you know, some like 14, 15-year-old kid's pickpocket. He really is more of a sidekick of Helena than of Indiana, but he's never obnoxious. He has a lot of street smarts. I think the only thing where it really kind of stretches belief is at one point he is able to like fly a plane despite never having done it before, but we did see earlier in the movie that he had like a whole like flight simulator set up where he was just talking to a pilot and like pulling on things, and the pilot was giving him like advice on how to do it, but it wasn't like he was never actually flying a plane until he got to fly a plane, you know. That was a little bit that stretched belief, but also it's Indiana Jones, so you know, you're gonna have some silly moments like that. To talk about kind of the structure of the movie, It is an action adventure, but I think it's a little bit too heavy on like the action elements. There's just a long sequence of like big action scene to big action scene to big action scene, like set piece to set piece to set piece, with very little time in between to breathe and have character moments. And like, that would be okay if like Steven Spielberg was directing those action sequences, but there was just no real like grandiosity to the set pieces that you would expect. This was directed by James Mangold, who's I think his most prominent films have been The Wolverine and Logan. Logan was an amazing movie. Wolverine was all right, but like his action scenes here, they're very hectic, very frenetic, and like it's not shaky cam, but it's like the editing version of shaky cam, and it just feels very messy. And I don't really like the action sequences in this movie. Like there's one point where like they're diving at the bottom of the ocean, and Indiana gets attacked by eels. Somebody points out that eels kind of look like snakes, and Indy's like, no, they don't. But he gets attacked by eels anyway. But you can't actually tell what's going on because the eels are moving in such a frenzy, and they've got like the underwater effects and everything, and it's just like a mess. And like, it would probably look like a mess in real life, but this is a movie and you want to be able to actually see the action, and you really couldn't tell what was going on in that sequence. You couldn't, honestly, for a lot of that sequence, you couldn't tell which diver was which person. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the action set pieces in this movie just felt ill-established and kind of confusing to follow. Like, there's a whole car chase in Tangier where it's like, how is anybody keeping track of each other? They'll like lose each other for minutes at a time, and then they turn a corner and oh, there they are, they're there again. It felt like things weren't well established there. There's one other character that I want to bring up. It's this guy. I don't remember his name, but he's one of the henchmen of the main villain. So he's another Nazi guy. And if you've seen Logan, you'll recognize him. He was the villain in that one. What's the actor's name? Boyd Holbrook. This guy is great. He's a very like trigger happy kind of a guy. He's often like screwing things up for the main villain, but you know, this guy, he plays a very good trigger happy kind of a character. There's also another sidekick who are a henchman that I didn't pull up a picture for, but he's just like kind of a big broody guy. I actually really like all of the henchmen in this movie. I felt like the henchmen had good, distinct personalities and memorable moments, you know, and I like that. It's like, you know, everybody remembers that big guy that Indiana Jones has to fight, and then he pushes him into the propeller in the first movie. Yeah, you memorable moments like those, and they really have those in spades in this movie. If anybody was here for stream last week, you'll remember that at 2 points I brought up that old like story element, or talking about like time travel, where it's like, oh, you can't go back in time and kill Hitler, because if you do, maybe something worse will happen, or time will stop you. Well, Bowler's entire plan is he wants to use the Dial of Destiny to find a time portal to go back in time and kill Hitler, so that Germany can win the war, because he feels like Hitler was the reason that the Nazis lost. So I talked about it twice last week, and it's literally the plot of this movie explicitly in text. Yeah, Windleby, real. That was like literally what it is. So three times in the last week, I have seen a story in which it's brought to mind that you can't kill Hitler with time travel. With the final set piece, you know, there's a lot to the ending of the movie that makes me think a lot of Raiders of the Lost Ark, in that if you've thought about the plot of Raiders of the Lost Ark, at no point in that movie does Indiana Jones actually meaningfully impact the plot. Like, if you took Indiana Jones out of Raiders of the Lost Ark, it would end up the same. The Nazis would get the Ark of the Covenant, they'd open it up, and they would die, right? And it's kind of the same here. Like, Indiana really didn't need to be there for the Nazis to fail. And also, his whole character arc, it just kind of out of nowhere with the whole time travel thing, suddenly he's like, I'm in the past, I gotta stay here. And like, if they had built up more about him like withdrawing from his wife after their son died and maybe like trying to live in the past, like if they had said something more explicitly in that regard, it might make more sense when he's in the past and he's like, I want to stay here. But they don't give him a moment to actually like wrestle with the ethics of staying in the past. She just knocks him out and he wakes up in his apartment present day. That was so unsatisfying. It was such an unsatisfying ending. It robbed him of any choice in the matter. It kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. Like I said, if they had had a scene earlier on, just one scene with him and Marion where she's signing the divorce papers and she talks about how he's just living in the past and he's not there for her or something like that, that could have at least had something to set the seeds of him suddenly deciding when he's in the past, he's like, I'm gonna stay here, you know? But it wasn't well set up. And that's the last Indiana Jones movie we're gonna get. Something with a pretty sudden and unsatisfying ending. If you're looking to see some fun action set pieces, you'll probably enjoy it. Like I said, they don't have like the big establishing shots and the grandiosity of like a Spielberg Indiana Jones action set piece. There can be a little hard to keep track of, so I've got issues with that. I did like the movie more than I disliked it, but I had a lot of issues that weren't adequately resolved by the end of the film, you know? So if you want to see it, maybe wait until it's on Disney Plus, I would say. I saw it in the theater, but I didn't feel like the big screen was really necessary to sell it. Because, like I said, the cinematography isn't anywhere near on the level of a Spielberg film. Oh, and one other thing. There's a moment where they're trying to solve a puzzle, and Indiana Jones is like, well, this is like Archimedes built this, and there's a pool of water, and Archimedes really liked water displacement, so he starts throwing things into the pool, and that actually does trigger like a hidden door. And I was just sitting there like, okay, now say Eureka. Now say Eureka. I like opened up my phone and wrote down, say Eureka, goddammit, and they didn't say Eureka. Like, that's the story about Archimedes. He figures out water displacement, and he jumps out of his bathtub and runs around the streets naked going, Eureka! And they didn't do it. Now, much later, somebody says Eureka, but it wasn't in relation to that scene, and so I was mad because it should have been in that scene. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm trying to get my channel monetized, so your view means a lot. Don't forget to toss me a like, and subscribe, and ring the bell. I stream these reviews every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific, so catch me live and join in on the convo. You can find all my socials in the description below, and thank you to all my patrons with a special shout out to pfftlecakes. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.